The EMD F40C is a fairly obscure six-axle passenger locomotive built in the mid-1970s. All 15 examples went to the Milwaukee Road for commuter work, but they operated under Metra for most of their lives, with all units withdrawn in the mid-2000s. 2 units ran in revenue service as late as the 2010s, but even though they remain on Metra's roster, neither has reportedly run regularly since then. This was also a commissioned build, but it has a tie-in with something I made for myself. This is, of course, the Nippon Sharyo Bilevel gallery cars. These were built for various commuter railways in the US, including Metra, but also including Caltrain, our local service on the San Francisco Peninsula. I almost built a set to go with my MP36PH, but I decided not to, since they would not prototypically match with anything else in my fleet. Much like with the MP36 and with the SC44, I had the most trouble with the nose of the F40C, despite its relatively boxy shape. All of the angled surfaces were difficult to line up, though I think I ultimately did a decent job minimizing the gaps. The angled windshield uses a bar for the center column and tubeless 1x2 bricks for the panes. The wedge plates on the sides give some illusion of a backward slant. I tried to experiment a bit with what otherwise might have been a fairly plain body. I raised and lowered the features on the sides, like the grills and the doors, by 1 LU. I don't know if that improved the aesthetics that much, but it did need a ton of extra structure to offset and reinforce the bodywork. The 3-part roof actually uses the same profile as the roof on my MP36, but this time I designed it without any old parts. I'm generally open to using stickers where I think LEGO would have used them, but I haven't made any for my recent models because I didn't know how long I would keep them. Mostly because of the striping on the locomotive and the cab car, practically impossible to do in brick. I did make stickers for this build. I also tried cutting around some of the Metra logos instead of pasting a big box, and I think that turned out quite well. Inside, the dual L motor setup actually traces all the way back to the charger, where I concluded that standard power functions components could not handle buggy motors. I had been looking for other ways to make lower torque and higher speed drivetrains, going so far as to try gearing down a train motor. This ran extremely poorly, and I should have already known. It only drove one bogie, and a train motor outputs half the power of an L motor. Later, after getting good performance out of the 5AT and the Q2, I started looking at L motors again. I tested something similar to what I had in the T1 tender, but with much fewer gear stages, and it ran well enough to warrant another look. In the M1, I again tried something similar, but I took out yet another gear stage by decoupling the pairs of motors and bogies. And that setup put up a very strong performance given the locomotive's size and weight. As such, I decided to use the same drivetrain in the F40C, along with the same sliding pivoting center axle I have used since the Ace. The sliding axle has just enough clearance to navigate R40 geometry, despite the long wheelbase of each bogie. Structurally, this model takes more from the Ace than any of my other previous models. The chassis consists of both trucks, both motors, the battery box, and the receiver, and the body sits on top of all that. Like the M1, the 1 kilogram locomotive can pull more than this setup can measure, easily enough to overcome official magnets. The entire body comes off in one piece to facilitate access to the electronics, but messing with the cables can still make putting it back a fiddly process. The roof itself comes off to access the power switch, and the space underneath actually has a decent amount of room for wiring and a serendipitously convenient retaining mechanism. Moving on to the Bilevel cars. Coming in at 51 centimeters and 850 grams, these are the largest rigid cars I have ever built, both slightly longer and significantly taller than my pair of P85s. I tried a few window designs before settling on this one, and I think I got close to the shape and size, but the amount of support needed basically eliminates any hope of having an interior. The 3-piece windows also turned out a little noisier in brick than in CAD. I used a ton of grill tiles to model the corrugated texture of the roof, and I offset the 6 wide parts by 1 LU to get the gentle curve. I'm not entirely sure if this is that much better than much simpler roof solutions I have done in the past, but it was definitely worth trying. Despite their large size and heavy weight, the cars roll very smoothly thanks to bearing axles, and they can navigate R40 geometry, though the wells tend to catch on switches. Finally, the client requested that I leave spaces for third-party lights. I had never played with any of the PF or PU light elements before, so I bought some to test with the assumption that any aftermarket solution would be physically compatible or smaller in size. For the locomotive and the cab car, I left holes for the lower headlight and the ditch lights, though I could not find a way to make room for the upper headlights. Especially in low light or darkness, the end result actually looks pretty cool. Perhaps cool enough for me to try to integrate into my own future builds. I definitely thought about revisiting an abbreviated Caltrain consist, either with a tweaked MP36 or an all-new F40. On that note, this is the end of the video. For any commission inquiries, check out the video description, and have a nice day.